So I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way for the rest of the weekend so nobody else has to address it or talk about it. Rebecca Black. All right? All right. Now let's go ahead and get serious now. It's done. It's finished. Khalas. End of story. That's it. Get it out of your system. All right? It's not Friday. It's Saturday now. All right? So get it all out of your system. And no, but inshallah, there's actually something serious I wanted to address in regards to this whole situation, because that's the only word I can come up with it for. But I have a talk, I think, later today about Facebook, and I'm going to be addressing something in regards to that. But nevertheless, so talking about the subject at hand, which mashallah Sheikh Yasser really beautifully explained, the concept of youth within Islam. And what's really important about what he explained, because I want you to understand how valuable that was, he's giving you how Islam and the sacred sources of Islam, which are, come on people, I'm not going to tell you, well, I kind of tweet a lot, so sometimes I have the opportunity to visit a very sleepy community that doesn't really interact or respond when I talk, and I'm not in the mood to deal with it, okay? So when I ask a question, what are you guys going to do? Alright, that was pretty pathetic. Alright? Later today, Wissam Sharif is coming. And when he asks a question and you don't respond, he'll probably start doing jumping jacks or something. So you better get it together right now, okay? So the sacred sources of our religion are, number one, the Quran, and number two, the Messenger alayhi salam, all right? What he just explained to you is how the sacred sources of our religion view youth. How are youth viewed within Islam? And that's very important to understand because that works into the context of the actual hadith. Now, I know you guys had some sessions yesterday, so I apologize if this is going to be repeating something from yesterday, but I want you to get a little bit of a flavor, or I want you to get a little bit of context of the actual narration, the text itself. Because within that itself, there's such magnificent beauty and eloquence of the Prophet ﷺ to be witnessed and to be observed and to be felt within the actual narration that I want you to get a little taste of it. So the Prophet ﷺ, and by the way, this narration is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. And one thing I always like to point out to, especially our young brothers and sisters, is I want you to know about these people. I want you to know about these people. Because we're here to talk about how we can secure our place under the shade. All right? And many times when you want to try to build an ambition or a goal such as this, what helps in formulating a goal or an ambition and to find your inner drive is to be able to identify someone who had similar goals and was able to achieve their goals. All right, this is Chicago. So when we talk about the sporting world, you guys pretty much have the greatest athlete that our generation ever witnessed, right? Michael Jordan, right? And so every basketball player that comes along that dreams about the Hall of Fame and gold medals and rings and championships and scoring titles, every basketball player that comes along, who's that one guy in his head, that one image that he has in his head that's fixated? Michael Jordan. And it helps that young man, or even young woman for that matter, who is venturing into the area of sports to want to achieve that same level of success. All right? And so similarly, we want to find our place in that shade. I want to be there in that shade. So I'm going to have to learn to identify those individuals who made their way to that shade and that were remarkable and amazing and set the bar, set the precedent, set the standard before us, and then try to emulate those people and look up to those people and live my life according to those people. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, I mean, we don't have any confirmation, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But in our husnul dhan and in our admiration for him, you know, we should have no qualms about saying the fact that he is more than likely one of those remarkable people that will be in that shade on the Day of Judgment. And what's remarkable about him, and I want you to know a little bit about him, the organizers specifically asked me to kind of address the issue of knowledge here, just real quickly. So what I wanted to tell you about knowledge was, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu is such a remarkable person. He accepted Islam in the beginning of the 7th year of Hijrah. In the beginning of the 7th year of the Prophet's residence in Medina, the Muslim calendar. All right? The Prophet ﷺ passed away after 10 years of residence in Medina, which basically means that Abu Hurairah had about 3 years to spend in the company of the Prophet ﷺ. All right? So far, these are just statistics and facts. All right, but what makes it so remarkable is, even though he spent only 3 years as a Muslim in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, he became the most illustrious narrator of traditions of hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. Allama Dhahabi actually says that that حَمَلَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ عِلْمًا كَثِيرًا, that he carried so much abundant knowledge from the Prophet ﷺ, لَمْ يُلْحَقْ فِي كَثْرَتِهِ. Nobody was able to match him in the sheer volume of knowledge that he was able to transmit from the Prophet ﷺ. There are over 5,000 narrations that come exclusively just from this one individual. And I want you to think about that. To be able to accomplish that in 3 small years. And you know what leads to that type of a success? It's focus. It's focus. He was telling you about focus. It's focus that leads to that type of success. Because he was even asked one time, said, Abu Hurairah, how are you able to do this? I mean, nobody comes even near you in this area. And you spend such little time with the Messenger ﷺ, like in terms of years. How are you able to achieve this? And he said, you know, while some people were busy with business, and some people were busy with their farms and their agriculture, and etc., 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 I made it my sole focus and objective to spend time and to take knowledge from the Prophet ﷺ. So when a person has focus, that's what they're able to achieve. And that's what we're talking about here. So now to get into the text of the hadith, so he narrates from the Prophet ﷺ, he says, سَبْعَةٌ, 7 categories of individuals. يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them a place, Allah will give them a shade in His shade. Allah will give them a shade in His shade. And what's very interesting here is that the word dhil, in the Arabic language, going back to its origins and its roots, if you look in the lexicons, classical lexicons, the word dhil itself, which is a word for shade, in the Arabic language, it has the connotation of being very comforting. Just the idea and the structure of the word was very comforting to the Arabs in and of itself. And that was very strategically done. Because a shade for any human being is a source of comfort. It is a natural human desire to be under some type of shelter or protection. And then particularly think about being an Arab. Think about being in the middle of Arabia 1400 years ago. There's no, and subhanAllah, how remarkable that in the one place in the world where you required the shade the most, it's hardest to come by shade. Right? Do you find a lot of trees going in the middle of the desert? Of course not. So then the one place in the world where you'd want a shade, it's hard to come by a shade. So shade was like a luxury to the Arabs. And that's where this word comes from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the Prophet ﷺ is saying Allah will give them a shade in His shade, it's not just like we take it for granted because we're indoors right now, living it up. Right? But you got to put yourself in that mindset that imagine the greatest, most precious blessing of all time. Imagine your greatest need and desire. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing that for you in an extremely honorable and dignified way. يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّ. And by the way, it's a rare commodity. It's not like it's available all around. It's not like, okay, Allah's giving them a shade under His shade, but guess what? There's a bunch of shades all around. No. It doesn't work like that. It's really hard to find a shade. And then, the very first category that we're told about, that we're informed about, that the one that we're talking about here is Shabun nasha fi ibadatillah. And of course, Sheikh Yasser told us about the meaning of shab, young person. And I wanted to clarify this here again based on the text of the hadith, because as the sessions continue and as you go forward throughout the rest of the sessions that are based on different excerpts from that same narration, that same hadith, then there will be certain narrations that will use in a masculine form. Even this one, shabun, this is masculine, but this is a little more subtle. There will be some that will straight up just say rajulun, which means man. And so you have to understand that the masculine gender is a universal gender. It's not exclusive to males, but this is rather universal. All right? And any student of literature should be familiar with that. All right? That's something that applies in many, many different languages. All right? And in fact, this is something classical scholars even commented on, where Ibn al-Hajar Asqalani rahimahullah, he actually says that this masculine form throughout the context of this hadith actually is general to both men and to women. And so that needs to be understood. Just because you'll come across some places and it might end up being translated as, and a man. But I want you to remember, this is equally talking about you as much as it is talking about them. All right? Now we go forward. Nasha'a fi ibadatillah. The next word is nasha'a. Nasha'a means, typically when you see a rough translation of this hadith, it'll say a youth who grew up. All right? That's kind of the meaning of the word nasha'a. Nasha'a means not just to be created, but it means to rise up. It means to grow up. It actually refers to the process of rising up and growing up, flourishing, blossoming, if you will. So it's talking about the entire process of the maturation process, the maturing process. Like Sheikh Yasser was talking about, from when you start to attain that sensibility and become accountable for your actions, from that point on until you become a full-fledged, mature adult that ends up being not responsible just for himself anymore, but then responsible for other people in terms of having a family. So that refers to that entire process of growing up. So basically what we find out from this verb is that this is referring to continuity. There needs to be consistency. We can't be one-hit wonders. All right? We can't be one-hit wonders. This is something that we're going to have to try to find a level of consistency with. Fi ibadatillah. In. The word fi means in. See, Arabic is a very vivid, a very graphic language. And especially classical language, classical Arabic, has a lot of imagery built into it. So fi means inside of. It literally means inside of. And so the imagery there is, imagine being immersed in something. Imagine being surrounded by something, being encased in something. That everywhere you look, everywhere you turn, that's all you see. That's what you're continuously surrounded by. So what the Prophet ﷺ is saying is, he's saying that one of the individuals, one of the category of people that will have the special honor and distinction on the Day of Judgment is that young person who grew up, who matured, while being surrounding him or herself with what? Ibadatillah, the worship of Allah. Now we're going to get down to the core of the issue. We're going to talk about the word ibadah. So ibadah gets commonly translated as worship. All right, thank you, 4 people. Ibadah commonly gets translated as worship. Very good. Jazakumullah khairan. All right, so ibadah commonly gets translated as worship, and that's fine. That is actually the meaning of ibadah. But there's always lessons, there's always beauty in when you take into consideration the other derivatives of a word from Arabic. All right, so another very basic derivative of this word, ibadah, is the word abd. What does the word abd mean, everyone? Slave. All right, so now we're realizing that there's a connection here. What's the connection between being a slave and between worshiping? Because worshiping is a manifestation, is the physical manifestation of the slavery that we feel towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It basically means that if we are true in our claim that we are slaves of Allah, then we have no choice but to worship Him. And if we do not engage in the worship of Allah, I can stand here and sing from the top of my lungs as much as I want that I'm a slave of Allah, I'm a slave of Allah, I'm a slave of Allah. I'll be doing the entertainment session later tonight. No, I won't. All right, so I can stand here and say it over and over again, I'm a slave of Allah, but if I do not engage, if I cannot put my forehead on the ground, if I cannot worship my Creator, then I am lying. I am false in my claim that I am a slave of Allah. And that's just the cold, hard truth of it. That's just the cold, hard truth of it. And that's something we got to come to terms with. Humility is something that is very hard to come by in our culture. And it's something that is not looked upon very fondly within the global culture that we live in today. I mean, right now, you know, with March Madness to, I got a text from a friend last night who was watching cricket matches. God forgive him. All right, so with the current culture of just sporting events constantly going on, this is something that's readily that's always on display for us, by the way. Turn on any random sporting event, and that's usually the type of behavior a lot of our youth are emulating, all right? And humility is the last thing you'll come by. It's all about self-congratulating, self-celebrating, all right? And that's sort of become the culture that we live in. So humility, humbling ourselves, and living up to that claim of being a slave of Allah is extremely important, very, very important. Now, having said that, what I wanted to next talk about is, so being a young person who lives, who grows up, who matures, who comes to adulthood and to maturity, while being completely surrounded, immersed in, and completely engrossed and engulfed in the worship of Allah. All right? Now let's talk a little bit about, first of all, that sounds really difficult. I'm just going to be real with you here. I'm going to be very honest with you. That sounds very difficult. Like, wow, like, do I have to wear like a tasbih around my neck and sleep in the masjid? Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand that sounds difficult. Right? So the first thing I want you to understand is, this is again, eloquence of the Prophet ﷺ. This is figurative in a sense of growing up, living your life in such a manner, especially this young part of your life, where when you do approach the worship of Allah, it is something that you completely devote and dedicate yourself to. When it's time for salah, there's nothing that could take you away from your salah. Your greatest desire in the world could not rip you and pull you away from that prayer. And again, that goes back to that earlier point that I talked about, and that requires focus. That requires focus. And in order to achieve that focus, we're going to have to put in a little bit of work. We're going to have to learn to appreciate this worship. And we're going to have to learn to see the amazing side and the blessings of this worship. The next thing that I wanted to talk about here is, while we're on this subject of ibadah, and because it's painting a very bleak picture for a lot of young people, like, how do I constantly just stay and find consistency in the worship of Allah? So now what I wanted to do was talk about the boundaries of ibadah. And this is something that is a huge problem in the Muslim community. We need to redefine the boundaries of ibadah. Because we have a crisis at hand where we've created this very, very narrow understanding of what is worship of Allah, what is ibadah, and therefore we've made it more difficult for ourselves to be committed to living a God-conscious life, to be living a good, pious, righteous lifestyle. Because ibadah is just something that is so unattainable for us. It's only fasting or only prayer or only recitation of Quran, and that's it. So I want to define what are the boundaries of ibadah. And I want you to understand, ibadah is anything. Ibadah is anything, any act, any even state of being that helps you show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how dedicated and committed you are to Him. It is anything that you do that helps you to display, to show, to prove to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are committed and dedicated to Him. Now when we look at it that way, we're about to redefine a lot of these things. So we don't only have to, and we should, that necessarily 5 times a day, we definitely have to, but we don't always have to just be making wudu and performing salah to be engaged in ibadah. If you say subhanallah, everybody say subhanallah. Everyone say alhamdulillah. Everyone say Allahu Akbar. Congratulations, you just did ibadah. That's ibadah, that's worship. Alright? When you go outside, or when it's time for lunch, and you get some food, and you see another student attending the conference sitting next to you, and they don't have any food in front of them, and you open up your tray and you say, come on, come join me. Take half my sandwich. And you do it because you care about that person, you love that person, because that is your Muslim brother or your Muslim sister. Alright, don't do it for each other. Alright, none of that business. Alright, so when you do that, and you did it simply because this is my Muslim brother or my Muslim sister, you just performed ibadah. You cared for your fellow Muslim. Alright? MashaAllah, I don't see a lot of people with cell phones in their hands, so I'm not going to mess with you, but alright? If you text your parents, alright? You text your parents, I love you, thank you very much, I appreciate everything you do for me. You say something nice to your parents, you smile at your parents, you say a few words of appreciation to your parents, you just performed ibadah. That's just simply how easy it is. That's how easy it is. And so we need to redefine these boundaries of ibadah, helping humanity, picking up a piece of trash when you go outside. You know what's one of the biggest problems we come across a lot of times when we have these conferences and these sessions? Is when it gets late night, you know, all the late night hanging out and all the late night chilling, right? That's whatever, I'm not going to comment, all right? But what the worst part, personally the worst part I find about that is, when you ventured back down into the lobby at Fajr time to pray Salat al-Fajr, and you just kind of walk by the couches and the lounges and the places where everybody was chilling at night, it's like a tornado came through there. We trashed the place. All right, not Rockstar trashed the place, but nevertheless, still we trashed the place. There's cups and there's bottles of water and there's tissue and there's napkins and there's food and there's leftover wrappers and there's everything's just kind of left around there. We just kind of trashed the place a little bit. Picking up that piece of trash, that's also ibadah. Cleaning up after yourself. What did the Prophet ﷺ tell us? This is actually one of the branches of Iman. Imatatul adha anit tariq, to remove something harmful from people's path. You think somebody likes to come and sit down on a couch and find your leftover Starbucks like spilled all over the couch? Nobody likes to see that. That's going to harm somebody. That's disturbing to people. But when you clean up after yourself and you remove that, forget about our ibadah. That's a branch of iman, which is the actual objective of ibadah, which drives our ibadah. So you actually prove and establish your faith when you just simply pick up some trash and clean up after yourself. You know, Sheikh talked about the tsunami and the earthquake in Japan. All right? When you do a little something, whatever's in your capacity. Now, I love talking about giving, donating, right, to student audiences. And be like, brother, why? Why don't you go talk to the Dr. Saabs, right? They're the ones with all the cash, right, Dr. Saab? All right? So, but I love talking to student audiences about giving in charity, because we've misunderstood the giving of charity. Kind of, again, the culture we've established in our community for fundraising and for charity giving. It's given this impression to young people, or people that might not have thousands and thousands of dollars, that for some reason they don't have a role to play in this whole area, this whole arena of ibadah, this whole area of ibadah. All right? Because we always hear 25,000, 25,000, who's got 10,000, 5,000, 4,000. We hear that and we think, oh man, no, that's not for me. I'm a college student, right? But that's not true. We go back and we look at the Quran, and what did the Quran tell us? مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ. The example of one who gives anything, something in the path of Allah, is like the example of a seed. One seed. Why does Allah give the example of one seed? Because it is so insignificant. So tiny, one seed. But subhanAllah, what does Allah say happens to that one seed? One seed. أَنْبَتَتْ سَبَعَ سَنَابِلٍ. It sprouts out 7 different branches. فِي كُلِّ سُنْبُلَةٍ مِيَةُ حَبَّةٍ. Each branch carries how many seeds? 100 seeds of itself. One seed became how many seeds? 700. So when you can give $1, raise your hands if in this room you can spare $1. Everybody can. Everybody can spare $1. All right, forget about it. Can everyone spare at least a quarter? Everybody can spare a quarter. All right? Well, guess what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at a minimum will multiply that for you 700 times. 700 times. But you got to give. You got to give. You got to stop making excuses for yourself. That's a major roadblock in trying to achieve ibadah, is when we make excuses for ourselves. All right? So give something. You hear about people suffering, people dying. Let the humanity in you awaken. All right? Be a good person and give something. Help somebody. All right? Now the last couple of things I wanted to say here, 2 last things, is there are many, many roadblocks in living this life immersed in, engulfed in ibadah, devotion and dedication to Allah, where I live my complete life in such a way where I'm doing everything to please Allah, in a way that it pleases Allah. Means I can eat, I can sleep, I can hang out with my friends, I can go and work out, I can have recreation, but I will be conscious of what is right and what is wrong in the course of that action. So when I play ball with my friends, I'm not going to curse, I'm not going to swear, and when I run into somebody or I elbow somebody in the head, I will apologize. And I will say, I'm very, very sorry. And that is my ibadah. That's my worship. All right? Now, what are some of the roadblocks? There are many, many roadblocks. The roadblocks can be summarized into one word, and that is temptation. And that's why Sheikh Yasser was talking about temptation. Temptation is the thing that often pulls young people away from this life dedicated to living in the obedience, in devotion, dedication to Allah. It is temptation, whether it be of the opposite gender, whether it be drugs and alcohol, whether it be of wasting time, whatever it is temptation. And now how do we fight? How do we resist that temptation? And this is another thing I love explaining to young people, because the answer is a lot easier than you might think it is. All right, because young people, that's the number one question. Like, how do I deal with this? Dealing with temptation is so simple. And that is, good company is the key. Insulate yourself. You know what insulation is? When there's insulation in the walls, you don't feel the cold that's outside. You don't feel the cold that's outside. All right? It insulates you. Insulate yourself with good, like-minded people. Find 2 brothers, 3 brothers, 4 brothers on campus that have the same commitment, dedication to pleasing Allah as you do. Find 2, 3, 4, 5 sisters on your campus that have that same level of commitment and dedication, and you will feel insulated. Dealing and resisting temptation will become easier. I guarantee it. All right? And the last thing I wanted to say here, and I'll end on this note, is probably, I feel, the most important realization at the end of this talk. And that is, notice what the Prophet ﷺ said, Shabun nasha'a fi ibadatillah. A young person who grew up immersed in commitment, dedication, and obedience, worship of Allah. Did it say perfection anywhere in there? It didn't say he was perfect. It didn't say he never made a mistake. It didn't say that he never slipped up. It never said that anywhere. And that's the second thing that gets us. You're going to go home from this conference, you're going to hear these amazing speakers in their lectures, and you're going to say, that's it. That was the motivation I needed. That was the spark I needed. I'm going to change the way I live my life. And you're going to start out good. And a day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days are going to go by. And you're going to be doing fantastic. And then you're going to hit a little bit of a speed bump. You're going to hit a little bit of a bump in the road. And what it does to a lot of people at that moment, they mess up, they slip up just a little, and just completely throws them. Spins them out. Throws them off balance. See? I can't do it. I messed up again. This is impossible. It's not practical. The Prophet ﷺ never asked us to be perfect. In fact, I'll even broaden the scope of this. Find for me in the Quran anywhere, wherever Allah has ever asked us to be perfect. He hasn't. All He's asked us to do is try hard. Do the best you can. And y'all are young people. Your potential is limitless. Not like that ridiculous movie where he takes a pill and goes skydiving. All right? I mean, truly, honestly, limitless. Y'all are capable of so much. We don't have time here to talk about the accomplishments of young people. But y'all are capable of so much. Y'all are gold and silver mines. You can do so much. Don't get bogged down. Don't get hung up over a couple of slip-ups here and there. Everybody has them. Everybody makes them. All right? All you have to remember to do is keep your hope attached to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep doing the best that you can do. And don't focus on your imperfections, but rather focus on the perfection of Allah's mercy and His forgiveness. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to practice everything that was said and heard.